All right, here we are, friends. Conversation 3, Shades of Life.
Hmm.
As we, just show up here in the space together without having put a lot of thought or planning into what we're going to talk about, but just kind of see it evolve in the space. And today I have a particular interest in our creative process, knowing that Tenneson, you've been creating these pop-up events on your own, and we know that you co-create with other people, including us. And we've been pretty deep and immersed in creative processes really for the last number of years, just expanding what we're up to. And currently, maybe always in creative process, whether that is design of some public engagement event or a training program, or just the things that I shouldn't say just, the things that we're all engaged in the online spaces of webinars or other kinds of virtual offerings. And I thought it might be kind of cool to just explore what that creative process means for us, maybe where it flows from, when it flows with ease, and when it's more challenged. So that's kind of where my curiosity lies for today's conversation.
Awesome. I feel like this is where we're supposed to go. Oh, that's a crazy topic, or oh, that's a good topic. You want to run, Jerry? You want to run, Mr. Improv?
Go for it.
Okay. Well, hi to you two, and hi to whoever's listening. I'm thinking back to probably some of this decade and a half-ish ago time frame when the three of us and others were in a pretty strong connection with one another. And I think it was about that time that I learned of or got some courage to start writing a blog. Because I actually remember a conversation, Kathy, at Bowen Island for an Art of Hosting. It might have even been the one that you were at,
Mm-hmm.
But I remember that there was a guy there named Gabrielle Shirley, and Chris Corrigan was there. And they're more early adapter kinds than I am, let's say. And they were talking about writing blogs and sharing blogs and featuring things on their blogs and everything. And about then I started writing, and I kind of dabbled for about 7 years, I think. And then about 7 or 8 years ago from now, I started writing regularly, like daily, Monday through Thursday, every week. So I end up writing probably 175 to 200 posts a year that are everything from here's a cool idea, or here's a picture, here's a poem, here's a design idea. So please go read my blog. But the point of me bringing it up here is it's around the creativity. Mm-hmm. So, many of us are hosting, and many of us are creating events and formats and things like that. And I remember, as a person who loves to play with the sort of principled narrative, offering a few things that were like questions. What if we were just trying to create spaces to be creative with one another? What if we were trying to create connections that brought more of that creativity with one another? And sometimes in a playful way, and sometimes in a serious way, and all the things that live in between that. So I have a certain, it feels like it's almost a biological narrative or a spiritual narrative in me that says creativity is what we're trying to do. Like, we humans can't not be creative. And I don't really want to hedge that with a bunch of circumstances where either people aren't creative or I don't feel creative. But I think that's an interesting premise to build upon. We want to be creative. And then maybe just the one thing I'll throw in, because you name these pop-up workshops, Kathy. I think in some of the ways that I keep evolving as a facilitator and as a human being, and trying to be reasonably savvy in the tools that are available to us, which includes online stuff, or just online presencing, I wanted to bring stuff that I was like really active in learning. Like I don't want to regurgitate some old stuff unless it's fresh in me, or unless it's coming back anew fresh in me. So the third workshop, I'm doing these monthly, as you know, but the third workshop is coming up next week, actually. And I created something. All of these are customized, right? So I created something around using poetry to create potent questions with groups or for groups. And those are things that I love. So more detail on all of that, but maybe a first little play into our Shades of Life conversation is that when I'm creating stuff, be it for a client or be it within an even known body of work, I feel like I have to start with the question, is this interesting to me? And that sounds like a rather selfish question, right? Or self-full question, but I find that that's useful. If it's not interesting to me, or if I can't find the interesting part of it or an interesting part of it, then I don't feel so jazzy. I don't feel so sparky or alive or creative. And I think I want to feel those things. And I want people that show up at workshops to possibly find some of that. So maybe that's my first little volley is, when we're creating, it's got to be something that we love, Maybe we're tapping into something that way. I'll pause there.
Well, the first thought that came to mind when Kathy mentioned creative process, I'll describe in a minute, but I want to just back up from it because it raised the question is, when does the creative process show up? And in what forms does it show up as? And my answer would be it shows up in lots of different ways, in lots of different forms. And the first thing that popped into my mind when Kathy mentioned was when we're learning something new. And so I thought about, like, when I was learning how to use power tools, we just built some stuff, and I never did learn like pottery, but there are other artistic things that people might learn to do, and they might just kind of create something in the learning space, as their way of experiencing that learning element. So that's one thing is for me, was whenever I've learned something new, it opens up the space for being a little creative about the use of whatever that is. As we just chat a little bit about, I'm taking this improv class, and and the way they described it, I don't recall it really, but a couple of the people that showed up came because of the description of the course, which was learning how you can't fail kind of thing. And that's a bit theme of the class is in improv, you can't fail. And so it opens up this complete total space to do whatever shows up instantly in the moment. So we're acting out scenarios and they go wherever direction you go. And it doesn't matter because you can't fail. You just go where you go with it. Now, we're learning a little bit of structure about improv. It's just like you're learning with power tools. You do certain things, you cut your finger off or whatever, like both and instead of but, that kind of thing when you're improvising conversations. But the core is that whatever shows up, let it show up and don't overthink it. You can't fail. Which then leads to one last little thing that's part of what we've been doing, which is the playfulness of it. And so we did a rhyming exercise last night that was just like, and we created our own beat, on our pounding on our thighs and created a beat and did a rhyming thing to it. And it was playful and fun. And if the rhyme went bad, then we just started over on a new rhyming thing. And so there's that anyway. It shows up in all different kinds of ways. And these are kind of three things for me that's kind of in my space in the moment, my thinking at the moment.
Cool. Thinking about when you said when we're learning something new, it prompted for me by necessity. Sometimes creativity shows up. And where my thought went with that was with my dad, who in his latter years, as his health was failing, and as he always used to say, I don't have any power anymore, I'm losing my power. He created all kinds of workarounds in his house so that he could continue to do the things that he loved to do and that inspired him. But it was by necessity. And he was very creative in that way. And then I think about creativity when inspiration hits. And I do some of my quickest writing when inspiration hits. And like you, Tenneson, I've got a personal blog, and also Jerry and I have a worldview intelligence blog. And so I write personally. I write poetry, most of which is not published. And then I write work, things that flow out of the experiences that we've had. And sometimes that is easy and quick. And sometimes it is more labored, but feels important. So I think it can take on any of those natures. And I also realized, I was thinking when one of you was speaking about this Facebook group that I belong to called Making Marks, and it came out of a different group, and was originally was established around art and just making the marks. And initially when the group was formed, I really didn't see myself as part of it because I don't consider myself an artist. However, seeing other invitations to that group, the person who started it means it in a much broader sense than just making marks and or just art, and poetry, writing. All of these things are also art. So I'm now part of the group and sort of reconnected to a community that has meaning for me. And then I don't want to talk about this right now. I just want to put a pin in it, is creativity around process, like creating processes for clients or open enrollment programs or whatever, because I do want to come back to that at some point, but I just pin in it for now, giving up the floor for somebody else.
Okay, well, I'm going to keep the merry-go-round going then for right now. Because I am thinking a little bit more about work stuff right now. So when you name the creativity topic, I am thinking about the pop-up workshops, and I am thinking about some other programs that I get to begin to explore. And I'm a person drawn to exploring, though. Like I find energy in, a new thing. Let's see what we can create with it. Or I think I love the conceptual framing of things, which sounds brainier than I mean it. It's more like maybe clarifying or maybe simplifying a few interesting relationships between things. And then includes like, okay, and now there's people in the room, and how do we get started in a good way? And, some of that. So I'm thinking a little bit more in a work way. And then I think there's a principle underneath that. So I'm going to stay with the work thing for a minute and then maybe come to a wonder about a principle. The work thing that I remember from the summer, I was with a group of people, and we were in smaller groups. So there were 4 or 5 of us, I think. And it was named, this was done in an open space format. Excuse me. And it was named as, it wasn't called Making Marks, but it was something about art and drawing. And, it had kind of a wild card feel, and I'm drawn to the wild card feel. I wonder what this is. So the 4 or 5 of us were there, and it was as simple as there's a flip chart piece of paper in the middle. This was meeting outside on a deck, so it had some outdoor vibe. There was a lake nearby. It was actually at the Practice for Peace gathering that I got to go to in Montreal in the summer. And so a few markers, like it wasn't some extravagant collection of materials or anything like that. And we just created this little process. And I think it was unspoken, actually. Like, I don't know if anybody said, let's do this in silence, but we did it in silence. And so it was like watching one person make whatever mark they're going to make on the paper, a swirl, a triangle, a word, a big thick line. And then when it seemed like that person was done, they'd put the pen down and then another person would pick it up. And it was a pretty distributed little thing to make this interesting little piece of paper. You know, I remember giggling. I remember doing some, you know, I mean, it's pretty free in this one. Some just interested little hums and haws. So it was just fun to do. And the principle that I'm wondering about living underneath all of that is, and I'll just get super serious, is, you know, is there a liberation that comes from such experience? Whether it's a tiny little, we're making marks on a piece of flip chart paper, or an improv class. Like Jerry, when you're naming it, it makes me think about, oh yeah, when the principle is you can't fail, what does that free in you or in people in the group? When I feel like I can't fail, excuse me, I can't fail and my creativity is actually needed, oh gosh, that's enlivening to me. Like, that's what a fun thing on a Thursday night or a Tuesday morning or a weekend, something, right? So I come back to the liberation though. What is it? Maybe, just maybe, there's something that in the creative process invites something that lives nearby or lives around it that has something to do with liberation or freedom or natural creative expression. And returning to those stories, to me, I feel like I always want to insert something like that in the very serious facilitation things that I do, right? And a lot of times it'll sound like, hey, want to try something a little different here? And I just try to pull people along, you know, in a hopefully good invitational way. So liberation, freedom, maybe there's something in all of that.
What's kind of interesting about that for me, Tenneson, is so the kind of the first question is what does being creative mean? What, you know, and we've probably heard people say it, and I know I've said it, I'm not very creative, kind of thing. And on the first day of the improv class, the instructor says, you're improving all day long. Because whenever you're in conversation, you're improving. You know, none of them, very few of them are planned out. So you're in dialogue and you're responding to each other, and it's all improv.
Including this conversation.
Yeah, including this conversation. And so what that says to me is we are all creative. And, you know, I mean, we're actually living creativity in our life, in the conversations that we're in, because they're some might be seriously planned out, but very few. You know, they emerge as they go along and go in the directions that they go. And so just saying that and saying to, you know, someone says, I'm not very creative. Well, yes, you are. Here we are in this moment, going where this conversation might go, and it's all improv and it's all creativity. That to me, it could be liberating, that if we all just saw that we're just living in moments of creativity, then what does that open for us? What does it unblock? Yeah.
So I would just pick that up and add a couple of things to it, because I'm thinking about creativity in a couple of ways. And one is this improving, free flow creativity that can show up without a lot of structure or ideas. So I think about you creating your garden, Jerry, or like once we built a deck in my backyard, then all of a sudden I could see things that I couldn't see before because there was some different outline that enabled a different way of thinking about it. Or I think sometimes in creating meals, we're being creative and improving along the way, depending on how, even if we're following a recipe closely, it's the, what are we bringing together? What are all those elements that we might be bringing together? And then I think that there's what I'm going to call designed creativity, which is, we've got, for all of us, we are process artists. We design processes for clients or for open enrollment or for pop-up little sessions or whatever the case may be. And then generally we're designing with a purpose. We have a purpose, we have some intent, we have some outcomes that we want to get to. And I think it's no less creative as we think about all of those pieces that need to come together to deliver a specific outcome. So I think we can be free flowing it, or we can be working within a structure, still be creative, and just sort of picking up a tangential thread from what you were saying, Tenneson, about is there a liberation that comes from the creative experience? I think sometimes, for me, and particularly in the free flowing, maybe there's even a relief that comes in the creative process. And then in the more structured kind of creating, that can sometimes be a more I'm going to say animated space, the word I want to use, where, especially if we're co-creating with other people, that there's give and take and allowance and sometimes groan zones in all of that before we get to a place where we collectively appreciate what we've created. I'll stop there.
Just to leap in for a moment, one of the other things that sort of sparked for me is play, doodle, draw in World Cafe. And, you know, this might be my own failing, but I talk about the value of it and how some of us think better when we're drawing and our hands are working, and the value of creating historical record of conversations and so on. But I've never described it as an activity of liberating ideas, of unblocking thinking. And that's another element of what play, doodle, draw might be doing, is by just doodling, we're actually liberating some thinking that might not have been there if we hadn't drawn that flower, or that's, you know, the sunshine, or hadn't written these 3 words down. All of a sudden, oh, dang, that's right, let's go, you know, kind of thing. So it's actually an activity of I'll use your word liberation as opposed to unblock, but it's a freeing kind of thing.
On Thursday of last week, I was part of a panel discussion that included Keith McCandless, who is really connected into liberating structures. I like him. I've never met him in person, but I've met him probably 2 or 3 times online now. And there's some like sparky spirit that I really appreciate. And he's got rigor in him also. So when we use the word liberating, I guess I started using that today, but I think it fits in many places. Keith's got some pretty good basic languaging that he's created, or he with others, that points to reclaiming some of that creative spirit. So there's language that he's articulated that I think really works well there. And I think like the tie-in for me here is at an institutional level or at a group process level, I often feel that there's a whole range of people in the room, of course, and under different contexts and pretenses and so forth. But somehow introducing the possibility that your creativity is our strategic imperative, is our core competency, you know, like mixing those. That doesn't feel manipulative to me, to combine those things together. Sometimes the flip side of that, I suppose, is I feel like there's at least a good chunk of modern narrative that has imposed a much more rigid, structural, rigid, I'm repeating, kind of storyline. And that's ingrained in us. That's ingrained in lots of like subconscious ways, worldview ways, all of it. And I feel like I come alive when that narrative is suspended or maybe challenged. And then if I go back to where I think I was speaking earlier, it does like challenge the notion of how do we view who we are as human beings, individually and collectively. And even if it's temporary, to re-invoke a certain level of inherent creativity, like, you know, you're improving all day long as you have every conversation that you have in the world, that kind of stuff. It feels fruitful to me. And then if I and when it feels fruitful, then I feel like I want to carry it out to groups of people and share that, or share the possibility of that. When I pull it back into the to me, it's all personal, but something a little bit more personal. I feel like one way of me living, I'm drawing it as a circle because that's how it shows up in my brain and on my paper. One way of me living is that I'm protected. I'm protective. I'm protective against feeling embarrassed, or not being smart enough, or not knowing things, not being as good at something as I want to be, all of that kind of stuff. So there's this part of me that like it's almost, I think out loud, it impedes a creative impulse in me when I'm in that kind of thinking system or reality system. And then another way of playing with it is in the creativity part of it for me, when I find what I find in one of the things that I find enlivening is when I feel like I am with life flowing. Oh my gosh, creative juices are all over the place, like in good ways. I feel like they're more potent, or I feel like they're more present. And maybe that's one of the best ways that I can, again, like search for the purpose narrative. What if the purpose were to establish, be with, surrender to a little bit more of life flowing? And that's particular language. Like I love the way that Toka talks about life flowing. And others might talk spirit, and others and other kinds of things, right? But it almost feels like there's something that is outside of any of us as individuals that can grow and come alive. And when I feel like I'm trying to lean into or float into or wade into those waters of creativity, it feels like there's something joyful and fruitful in it. I think I've needed to, I think I'm still working on this. Oh, that was a hedge. I'm so working on this right now. Disabusing myself, I love that word. Disabusing myself of the pressure of being as things are supposed to be. Oh, supposed to be? Man, that's loaded language to me. I better stop.
I'm just gonna jump in here for a second, because what's really bubbling up for me is this notion of play.
Yeah.
And as adults, for some of us, play is difficult. And it's difficult because it asks us to let go of our notions of professionalism and adulthood and I don't know. And it asks us, I realize that playfulness asks us to be vulnerable, especially when we're in spaces with other people. And so there are some people who we know who embrace that so easily and quickly. And then there are others of us who go like, oh, you want us to do what? And yet just listening to you, Tenneson, and thinking about these spaces of I don't know, introducing the possibility of creativity, making it a strategic imperative when we can invite ourselves into playfulness,
Mm.
then that I think does all of these things that we're talking about, which is it's a liberating space that allows us to come more into creativity. And as someone who hesitates to really bring the playfulness into group process, that's now just got me rethinking a little bit about that and about invitation into that, with an awareness of how much hesitancy so many adults carry related to that, including me.
Go big or go home. What I was struck by when you were starting to talk about narratives a bit, Tennyson, was, so first off, the range of narratives, from the grand narrative to the company narrative to the individual narrative to whatever. And when I first got interested in worldviews, I spent some time at IONS, Institute of Noetic Sciences, because they were doing some very interesting work around worldviews. And one of the big takeaways I walked away with from my first time there was what the executive director then, Marilyn Schlitz, called the intersubjective space between narratives. And that we were in that space right now. So we were coming out of one grand narrative, which is mainly for Western society, the Enlightenment narrative. But there's a new one that's going to emerge, and we don't know what that is. Now, that was 15 years ago. And an article came through a couple of days ago, and mostly around education, but the author talked about we're in the time between times, which is also another interesting way of saying intersubjective space. But on the big thing, on the grand narrative thing, I don't want to dive too much into it, because I'm trying to think about that time between times as the time for creativity. That we're now in the invitation to create a new narrative on a grand narrative. But I think also, like, let's bring it down to a little more realistic level. Two companies are going to merge, and they have very different cultures. And as they merge, there's maybe two opportunities. One is one company's narrative becomes the dominant narrative for both, or the other is that they're in that intersubjective space between two narratives of two companies coming together to create one new narrative. And what's it like to host that kind of bringing together to create a new story, a new narrative, whether it's my personal story, or two companies coming together, or some other circumstance where you're in a space, a little bit of the space. I kind of think of the groan zone a little bit, or the chaotic path a little bit, or whatever. You're in a space of not knowing exactly what the new is going to look like, but you're in the invitation to co-create that, create it, do whatever that time between times is, or the intersubjective space between narratives. So.
Well, and I don't think it just applies to company mergers. That intersubjective space between narratives is also the space between history, reality, and future.
Yeah.
And we just did some client work where that seems very applicable.
Gosh, I feel myself like in the broad spectrum of domains and places here now, because on the broad scale of people, oh gosh, here we go, people in organizations everywhere, or that kind of thing. So thinking in that spirit broadly, maybe this is some of what happened in this recent workplace that you were in. Like, Like people, I don't find that people just jump right in with, well, let's get to the deepest meaning of all things. It takes some coaxing and some stories and some, some stuff to even begin to approach that, right? But I do find that people, these are like the statements that I find myself repeating and from the belly. I find myself talking about like humans are hungry. Humans are hungry for connection. Humans are hungry for learning together. Humans are hungry for doing good work together. Some of those kinds of things. And sometimes when I say those things, I feel like I fear that the audience is saying, that's great, Tenneson, but could you please bring it down? That kind of stuff. And that might be true, right? And yet, in the time between times, it feels to me like we need some of these like anchoring value propositions. Whoa, that's different language. A preposition, a possibility, a value possibility. Second, losing power here. So that's at the big layer, and I think I'm saying that because I'm continuing to learn as the version of group process artist, group process facilitator that I am. There's a few things that I can offer, and sometimes I feel like those initial comments about what's possible or what's the possible story that we're living are the most impactful or the most liberating, the most freeing, something like that. And then if I pull all of that down into the, radically close personal, you two know that my daughter and son-in-law had a baby recently. So I'm a new grandpa, and this little baby is now just over a month into her life in the body that she has on this planet Earth, kind of thing. And my daughter and son-in-law made quite a transition here just in the last, I guess it was at the start of last week, where they'd both been on maternity/paternity leave. So here we are, all hands on deck, right? Adjusting to a first baby and learning and not sleeping and having a few successful days and then feeling like crap. All of that was going on. And then paternity time ended for my son-in-law. He went back to work. And so it like reset something in them, and of necessity, I think, instead of not trying to be cute with it. They're not at least during much of the daytime, they're not a two-parent home. It's a one-parent home. It's my daughter, who's also off from work, kind of thing. And there's something about her being able to live into the new story. I heard them struggling. I heard them like struggling in the way that most people do in such a circumstance.
Right.
But it makes me think about like pulling all of the big story narrative stuff down into, sometimes it's as simple as that stereotypical adjustment of your sense of accomplishment during a day when you're raising a newborn. Sometimes is, hey, I showered today. That kind of thing, right? So it takes such an adjustment, both internal and external. I guess I've been a person who's always been interested in how those stories shape who I am and who my kids are and who the people I get to work with are.
And when does the story take a right angle turn or a left angle turn or a 180-degree turn?
Yeah.
What's the catalyst?
Fun.
And it can be a newborn.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Well, I realize we're probably getting close to the end of our time for today, right?
Seems that way. Yep.
If we're talking, like maybe each of us in a little checkout way or last words for now kind of way, if you're to say like what feels like it's a I don't know what, like a potent harvest or an interesting insight from today with these topics around creativity and liberation and where we've gone with them, what is it for each of us? And then you could do some closing words, Kathy, after that.
Well, I think what sparks for me around this is that creativity is a natural ongoing process. Many of us don't claim our own ability to be creative or recognize it.
Mhm.
And it's kind of the stuff of life, I think, whether we're talking creativity through necessity, or creativity because it flows, or because we're in conversation. I think we maybe put too much weight on a word that we don't understand is active in our lives every day.
Mm.
It's a little harvest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would very much echo that. I think when the instructor offered that we're creative all of the time, even though we don't think of it as that, that to me it's like, oh, well, that's the story to tell to everyone everywhere, is, you're living creativity in your daily life, even though you don't really recognize it. And sometimes maybe just celebrate a little bit, like when you're going to start playing dolls or cars or trains with your granddaughter, and then you're going to be a 2-year-old and not a, creating stories, because kids create amazing stories out of the middle of the air. And so it's I'm going to add that, as you were saying, humans long for connection, humans long to be together. I think another intrinsic part of us is this notion of creativity, whether it's, the favorite TV program we all used to love, I did anyway, MacGyver, who always could create a solution to everything. That's MacGyver life.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, I recognize that one of my favorite ways to cook, which is not necessarily the favorite way that people around me like to cook, is to open a fridge and see what's there and say, oh, I could use that and that and that and that, and here we go.
Yeah.
And sometimes that works out marvelously, and sometimes it works out kind of crappy, but there's joy in it. Like, there's still fun in it to me. Oh gosh, sure. Mix up a little of this and a little of that. I remember one of the people that I worked with in my early OD life, let's say, is a person named Myron Kellner Rogers. He goes by Myron Rogers now. And Myron was talking about kids at some point, and he said, kids learn. It's not kids try to learn. Kids learn. He was speaking to that dimension. And I think there's something interesting and compelling to me in that about being creative. We have 1,000 things that can, school us into the notion that we're not creative. And maybe there's 1,000 things that can tease us out of that, again, that belief system. So I think that's hopeful, actually. And as a facilitator, I find myself working to some pretty simple narratives sometimes. I'm trying to create environments or experiences where there's a little more wisdom, a little more kindness, a little more helpfulness with one another, and a little more life-giving quality with one another, or life-giving experience with one another. I'm enjoying our Shades of Life conversations because there's just something about being with people. I have that hunger, but being with some colleagues and being with some friends, some fellow sense makers of everything from the things ethereal to just lots of moving parts. And to me, I find those contribute to like some healthy humanness together. I have that desire personally, and in the groups that I or you or we or any of us get to participate in. Thanks for today.
Yeah, thank you for today. I like this, like, healthy humanness together, and I find also after all of this great conversation, I'm leaving on a little bit of a somber reflection around the intersubjective space between narratives when I look at the time we are living in the world, it's my hope that we're in the intersubjective space between narratives.
Kathy, can I throw one more thing in?
Absolutely.
It's because you sparked today's blog post. I don't know if you saw it or
Yeah.
memorized it yet. But you put it was somewhere on one of your social media feeds that I get. I think it must have been Facebook. Let me just find it here. It was a thing from Topher. Oh, what's his name? Now I have to find it.
Topher Kiefer. Or
there it is. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just see. Sorry, my computer's going a little bit slower here. But it was this. So I ended up posting this today. So Topher Kirby, and it came from you anyway. And it says, so he's an artist slash poet, it sounds like, from Indiana in the US. So do you know him personally? Is that somebody you know?
No, I don't, but I'm inspired by him.
Yeah, well, likewise. And I was inspired by your inspiration. The words that I picked up today were: surround yourself with people who see the magic and the wonder in the world. That kind of vision makes this life so beautiful. Something about phrases like that pull me, and our conversation pull me back into like, these little moments of wonder together, they do a whole lot for the human spirit and imagination. Or they do for mine. I hope they do for others too.
Lovely. That feels like a sign off now.
Say it. I want to hear your peace out.
Peace out.
Peace out. Yeah.